Robin Hollander's career has included Avatar, Avengers Endgame, The Wilds, and Eternals. And the new project is Cocaine Bear. Robin, the movie is called Cocaine Bear. No disrespect to any of the great cast members because it has an amazing cast. But if the bear of the title is not incredibly great and just created in such a incredible fashion, I don't think the movie works at all. So I guess like, how did you start in terms of creating basically the central figure in the film, the titular character, I guess, right? So what were the first conversations like with you and Elizabeth in terms of making this come to life?
I think the first conversations we had were actually in November 2021. And, the world was in a sort of a pretty weird place at that time. And I think no one quite knew. Oh, sorry, 2020, I think. I'm getting my dates wrong because it was a bit of a blur. But we all met up in a room on our end. Obviously, New Zealand, the pandemic was handled slightly differently and slightly more sort of lockdownish early on. So we all had the luxury of being in a room together. And then we had this sort of multitude of Zoom icons pop up. And I think that blew Liz's mind first off the bat, like just seeing how many people we had around one table. So it was a pretty wild time. And I think that sort of set the tone for the whole project, which was ultimately a really fun collaboration between us on this end and Liz on her end before we could actually finally meet in person and shoot this movie. And it's good that you mentioned Koki, the title of character, because that was the one thing that Liz sort of said from the word go is, she needs to look real. She needs to be believable, but at the same time, we need to have her character down to a T. So she's not bloodthirsty. She just loves her Coke. And if she runs out of Coke, or if you get between her and the Coke, or her and her cubs, that's when bad things happen. So that was sort of the brief that we had from the get-go. And then I think we just had a really fun time in exploring what makes a real bear and then what makes a real cokehead and how do you combine the two. It couldn't be too human. It couldn't be too animalistic and too sort of Nat Geo doco style. And that's where we had a lot of fun for a couple of months in just sort of shaping this character with Liz and obviously with the team on our side here, various tests, various studies, lots of reference into what cocaine would do to the body or to an animal, as far as you can obviously reference that. And yeah, I think we came up with a pretty fun result.
It's incredible because one of the things I love about watching the film is that there's such weight to I know this maybe sounds silly, but I was like, there's such, it feels like it's real, right? You know what I mean? Like in the scenes and everything, there's like such a weight to it. And I feel like sometimes I'll see CG or movies like characters that are computer generated and they don't feel like that. They don't feel like they're that physically imposing in the scenes. And I guess like how much trial and error went into like calibrating that to like make sure it worked with like the physical actors that are there. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing.
Yeah, a lot. And I'm glad you picked up on that because I think for me, that's the hallmark of CG when it's not quite right is the lack of weight. Have these big creatures absolutely rampaging through a shot and your mind is telling you that it looks real and a still frame you might go, that's a real thing. But then in motion you go, but something about it isn't quite right. So for me, it was the weight, and for my animation supervisor, it was the weight as well. And we really tried to build a system that sort of would give it a heft that she needed. And we looked into it. So one obviously is a sort of a performative aspect. Does she move like she's heavy? Okay, cool. Check. We've got that. And then how does that translate back through the rig that we build? And as with any creature we build, you start with the skeleton, you have muscles, we have a fascia that goes over the top. And that sort of gives you that first level of jiggle, if you will. It's all the muscle deformations and the transfer of weight. We then sort of added a skin slab over the top of it, which is like a layer of fat, if you will. And that could slide around a little bit more. So there was lots of trial and error there in painting stiffness maps and making sure that, you'd get jiggled when you wanted to, but not jiggle when you didn't. And that is really just trial and error. So if a gust of wind makes her jiggle, she doesn't look heavy, even though the system kind of works. And obviously, if she walks and nothing jiggles, then we didn't push it quite far enough. So you had that. Then we put a layer of skin over the top, which is sort of the rug that ties the room together. And then ultimately fur. And again, the fur is really what makes the whole jiggle and the muscles and the way it read, which adds an extra layer of complexity because the fur in itself obviously has bend and flex and that will move. But the underlying skin had to move, which then meant the underlying fat had to move and the underlying muscle had to move. So it was a bit of a puzzle to get it all right. But we ended up with a system, I think, that we could really fine tune based on the performance. And even then, we quite often had to lean into animation to sort of ham up the impact a little bit more, just to sort of trigger the systems a bit more and give it that weight.
Right. you mentioned the fur too. I was thinking the other thing was like how the cocaine looks on her fur, right? And like and around her snout. Again, just awesome. It's so like really well detailed and looks like completely real, basically, right? Like what I would imagine a bear doing cocaine would look like. So I guess like
Yeah.
like what, I like, do you have reference points for that? Or like how did you kind of like get it so like the fur and like it would look real, like kind of around the snout, I guess.
Yeah. I petitioned for the budget to go up so we could do some accurate reference shoots, but we couldn't quite stretch it that far. So it was mostly flour on animal fur. So I've sort of got I've got a little dog and I had a big dog at the time. So they had to sort of stand in for some reference shoots that we did. Be it flour sort of spilt all over their fur, or in the instance of my big dog, which was a boxer, put some coconut oil on his nose and had him sort of lick it off. So a lot of the early case studies, not just with the look of the cocaine, but I guess just the behavior, trying to get something off your nose, be it coconut oil or cocaine, was sort of in part driven by some of our pets, some online sort of research. There's tons of clips of dogs getting into a bag of flour. So yeah, there was a bit of fun and trial and error and sort of trying to get, I guess, the granularity of the cocaine right. If it's too chunky, it doesn't quite look right. If it's too thin, then it just looks like you have an old bear that's got gray fur. So it was a bit of trial and error, but I think in the end, it came together really nicely. And it was actually a combination of the palette, so the look depth side of things, driving the actual shading on the tips of the fur, and then obviously effects simulations on top. So actual particles that sort of land on the fur and travel with Koki as she moves through a shot. And then also a little bit of compositing, just sort of, grading in little areas, lifting up some values, and just adding a little bit of that sort of the last 5%, if you will, to tie it all together.
Yeah. I want to ask you too. Obviously, we're talking about the creation. There's so many like great set pieces in the film too. Obviously, like there's and the. I mean, I'm sure you probably talked about just the ambulance chase is an incredible action sequence, and it's just so many different aspects of it that feels like are very much something that you had to like create, not just with the bear, but with like the ambulance probably itself, and like the way the even like I mean, the bodies are falling, all these different things that feel like they're all like part of this incredible like CG sequence basically. And it looks again, like it looks great. Like I don't know how people would look flying at it. The whole thing, like I'm suspending disbelief that this is what it looks like, but that's what it feels like it would look like. So I guess like when you were kind of like going into that sequence, the big, the chase with the ambulance, I guess like, yeah, how was that like I mean I'm assuming you were like that was like a show stopping kind of thing or whatever, but like what was that process like, and like how did you kind of like make it look how it does in the end?
Yeah, so I actually think COVID in a weird way was a benefit to us there, because our pre-production period was fairly substantial while the whole world was trying to figure out how we shoot a movie during these sort of testing times. So the previous beat that we did for that was fairly extensive. It was the main previous beat that we did for the whole movie. And so we had a lot of back and forth with Liz and her team and us on our side, and sort of spitballing ideas and coming up with angles. And then when we actually managed to shoot it in Ireland, I think the execution of the crew on the ground was, spot on. They had everything in place to sort of make that previous really come through. So it was a combination of practical on-set ambulance. I think they sourced an ambulance from Germany, flew that over, shipped it over to Ireland, and they were sort of fanging that through a forest in Ireland with Scott Seiss, who plays one of the paramedics, who's a stand-up comedian, never acted before in his life. And they got him in because of some of the videos he's been doing, and Liz really loved him. And he was just game for everything. Like they literally strapped him to the back of the ambulance, flying through a forest in Ireland while, everyone was yelling at him, and he's sort of hanging off the back, pretending to be chased by a bear. So I think if you have a performance like that as your starting point, you're already laughing. There was also some set pieces that we shot on stage, also in Ireland. So that was an ambulance, same ambulance really. And we had him, initially we had him on this sort of hydraulic pad, and it was just too much. So we just had a bunch of big grips and metal pipes and sort of rocked the ambulance a little bit. And those are all of our sort of internal studio set takes, if you will. And then it was just combined with some photography that we shot on the same location where the actual chase happened, just going up and down the road, tiling out the scene, making sure we had all angles covered so we could sort of stitch it all together. And then it was really just, trial and error again, getting Koki in there, making it believable. A lot of people sort of, when they saw the movie, say like, well, the thing that fell apart for me is how fast she was running. Like, no way could she chase that bear. which isn't true. Like there's tons of videos of black bears, you know, doing 30-mile-an-hour sprints, and it's terrifying. So we figured if they can go 30 miles an hour without cocaine, you know, maybe we can sort of up it a tiny bit, make it a little bit more dramatic. And then it came together really well. And then there's obviously the big sort of climatic shot where we hit a tree and there's a digi-double takeover. So Beth, the ambulance driver, goes flying through the windscreen. That one, in essence, was just a bit of trial and error. It's trying to get the camera moves right on the day. We had the actress playing Beth sort of lying on the floor and basically rolling into an end position. And again, we had really great previs for that, which we used internally to sort of get the physics of her coming out the windscreen right. And then we could show the actress and say, look, this part, this hookup is what we'll do digitally. We just need you to start in this position, roll into this position. It meant the camera operator had something to focus on. And, you know, there's a few takes to get it right, a few trenches dug to get the camera low enough. And I think all the pre-production work we've done really came together. So it was a sum of all parts that made it work.
That's amazing. Yeah, really, it's an incredible. It's a great scene. And the end of that scene, it's just great. The whole thing is just great. I feel like we talk about this for a while, but we do have to wrap it up. Robin Hollander, the visual effects for Cocaine Bear. Thank you so much. It was great chatting.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Pablo Helman was an Oscar nominee for Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, War of the Worlds, and The Irishman. And he's here to talk about the new movie, Killers of the Flower Moon. This is your fourth film now with Martin Scorsese. You did Silence, Rolling Thunder Review, and obviously the aforementioned Irishman. So how has your relationship, I guess, evolved and like over that time and as you got into through Flower Moon?
It's always great working with Marty. It's always learning something from him. He's always willing to talk about film and why he does what he does. And sometimes you don't need much. You just start a little conversation and then he kind of goes into all this incredible world. And then just working with him has to do with, taking a look at a lot of references, a lot of books, a lot of pictures, a lot of movies from the time, especially because Killers of the Flower Moon is a 1921 period film. But getting us all in the room with the DP, with the, everybody in production design and taking a look at all the stuff that we need to put together. And then talking about, how realistic everything has to be. I mean, from the look of things, the architecture, obviously, the geography, the trees, the vegetation, the lighting. I mean, everything has to be, completely consistent with the story. And that's why we shot Killers of the Flower Moon in Oklahoma. We embedded ourselves into the Osage Nation, the reservation, and we were there shooting like 20 minutes from where all the bodies were buried. And it's just living with that environment that makes the work at the end look completely photorealistic. Because when I'm working with the artist, I'm remembering, the smells and the way we had to run from one place to the other, the weather, the tactile, sense of working with Marty, and then it's actually taking a look at the whole work and then realizing that at the end of the day we did like 85 minutes of the movie on visual effects, and that. The first thing that Marty said to me was, "I want your work to be completely invisible. I don't want to see it. I want this, historical reference to be what dictates whatever we're doing." So whenever I presented work, there was always a reference, just to remind Marty of what we were talking about. There was, obviously a lot of oil rigs because the story is about oil, bubbling oil, working with special effects, getting the methocell on the water and the coloring that the oil has, but then having to change that in post a little bit, but working with special effects because this was also a very big visual effects, special effects film working together. There was also working together with the DP Rodrigo, who I have a great relationship with, talking about different formats, anamorphic, and working with the Bell and Howell, 1920 camera, for instance, to do even some shots, where we crank the camera, and that's part of working with Marty. It's just like a big thing about film, yeah. But of course, we had to use color film instead of black and white, and then we had to match, all the look of the 1921 documentary work. Then besides all the oil rigs, hundreds of oil rigs, we had to do cows and horses and riders and train stations and with the crowds and crowd replication and the last shot of the movie, looking down on a drum and then coming out, 200 feet up in the air, taking a look at hundreds of Osage, dancers that were completely in CG because we didn't have as many, and also Marty had this sense of finishing the movie with kind of a sense of the eye of the Osage people. So looking at it from the top and taking a look at, getting the people to dance and just form an eye that was all done through visual effects. Then there were things that were unexpected, like dozens of morphs between performances that, that were done so that we would take some air out of the, the performances. Or things like, for instance, there was a character in a car that crashed into a tree that the audience, in the screenings, they couldn't tell who that person was, and that was because he wasn't wearing a hat that was wearing in other scenes. So we have to put a CG hat on him, and a bunch of blood. Then there was the keeping up of the sickness of these four women that were getting sicker and sicker throughout the 3.5-hour movie. And because we tried to do it with makeup, but because we shot out of continuity and because the edit changed, we had to reinvent, how we would make him sicker throughout the movie. It was just, all in all, it was an incredible experience. Historically, and also it was at the beginning of the pandemic, and there was no vaccines at the beginning, so we all had to live together, and graciously the Osage Nation shared the first vaccines with all of us. But again, it's the invisibility of the work that we did that I think is really important. And it's funny because that part of visual effects is on one side. I mean, we are all familiar with all these other things that we do in visual effects that are really, glaringly, there. And it's really great to work on invisible work because it shows to all the people that, we all cringe when we hear somebody talking about, this is bloated with visual effects or whatever. And I know that it's not that way. That it's all we do is very difficult work, but it's good to work on something to tell, the world that we do other things and that they're as difficult and as voluminous and as nuanced as all the other work that we do in visual effects. And it's great to be recognized just for that. Yeah.
It's amazing. I mean, like you said, like I've seen the movie, like some of the stuff you were just saying there. I cannot believe that it was visual. I guess, like, you're like, it doesn't even track that it's visual effects. Like the scene you're talking about with the guy in the car. Yeah. I think that's is that Sturgill Simpson's character, I think, or maybe. Sturgill, and like you can't, like, I've seen that now multiple times, and he's got a hat on, and now I'm gonna have to see it again and see if I could. Is it a challenge? Like, it sounds like a great challenge, I guess, from what you were just saying. But is it like knowing that it has to be like straight up invisible, that you would not, like the average viewer, you don't want to pull them out of this story, and especially like you're saying, such an important story and set in such a historical time that you would not expect to have visual effects in that time, right? If you're watching it, they're not going to see like obvious CG in like 1920s. So that challenge for you, I guess, is something that's wonderful, but I mean, like, how much of a challenge is that, like, and how much trial and error goes into making sure that it is invisible?
Well, in a sense, it's a lot easier to do, or for me at least, to take a look at, photorealistic work in terms of the process. Working with the artists is the same as doing some other work, but it's like working with Marty. It's like he's got such an incredible sensibility, and of course, as visual effects supervisors, we need to, be that director a little bit, and a little bit of it stays with you, as you move on to different projects. Because I could just go back to working with Marty and preemptively offer him something that he would have shot. But you need to know lenses and storytelling and framing and all this other stuff, and you need to live with that filmmaker, and you become that. So, and in a sense, it's really easy to work with Marty because unless there's something that is inside his head, you just do your work and you say, see this, be this, and then call me when you got it. There was one scene that was inside Marty's head, which is when Molly, one of the actresses, is really, really sick and is about to die. She doesn't die, by the way, but anyway. But you're seeing what she's seeing, which is a bunch of fire that was outside her room, and it's basically seeing from inside of her what she sees, and encompassing the fire of how hellish the situation, the world is, but it's a completely internal view of it. And that's kind of like the fun part of working with Marty, because you sit down and you talk about, how screwed up that is, you know what I mean? And he has an incredible sensibility and very instinctive, sensibility for humanity and creating characters. So he's telling a huge epic story that is historical, but he's seeing it through the relationship of the characters that are in there. And I think I have a feeling of that's why the movies are so extensive. It's because he needs to take the time to take in all the micro performances of people like Bob De Niro and Lily Gladstone and Leonardo DiCaprio. It's just like the camera is just there as a witness, and it's just capturing whatever it is. And when his tool is the camera, right? I mean, the director's tool is they to be honest, you don't have a lot of tools. You have the camera, you have the lensing, you have the framing, you have the lighting, the performance, the music. And then you just point the camera in one direction, and once in a while the camera is looking at something, and all of a sudden the camera just goes like, look at this, and then look at this other thing. It's an incredible experience working with those filmmakers, because it actually dictates how you relate to other people, because it's about communication.
Right.
And when you're talking to somebody, you don't have a lot of time, and then you go boom, exactly to what you want to do. And Marty has that, that skill of telling you a story with the camera.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Incredible stuff. I feel like we could definitely talk about this much longer, but we do have to wrap up. Pablo Helman, Kills the Flower Moon, visual effects. Thank you so much for doing this.
Right. Thanks.
Andrew Jackson was an Oscar nominee for Mad Max Fury Road and an Oscar winner for Tenet. And other projects have included Dunkirk and The King. And he's here to discuss the blockbuster hit Oppenheimer. Similar to Pablo before you've worked with your filmmaker Christopher Nolan multiple times before. And in terms of Oppenheimer, I guess, like, for you, what were like the first conversations with him about how you wanted to approach this project?
So the first conversation, I think Chris called me and said he had a script that he wanted me to read. And it was going to be a bit of a challenge, because he really, for this script in particular, he really wanted all of the effects to be filmed, based on filmed elements. And that's kind of always a priority for him. But on this film, it was more like an absolute rule. Like, we didn't want to have anything that was not based on at least some sort of photographic input. So I read the script and we talked a little bit about ideas, and and how to approach it. And I guess there's essentially two parts to the film. There's the imaginations and ideas that are going on in Oppenheimer's head during his early life, which were a challenge in themselves, because they're not described exactly on the page of the script what that looks like. And really, Chris' challenge to me was to come up with something to represent those thoughts and ideas that was both kind of visually engaging and related to the script, and also was possible to build something and film it. And so that sort of that process consumed quite a reasonable bit of time and the head of the shoot. Or actually started a couple of months before pre-production, and spent a lot of time with Scott Fisher, the special effects supervisor, in his shop in LA, just building and experimenting with ideas. I come from a practical effects background, so it was quite a fantastic experience for me to go step back into the workshop world again. It's been a while since I've sort of lived in that workshop environment, but it's a little bit like it doesn't change as much as the computer world that we're more familiar with now, where everything's changing all the time. The workshop was pretty much the same as it was 10, 20 years ago. So that was great experience for me. And working with Scott and his guys in that shop, and we'd shoot a whole lot of different ideas and show them to Chris, and we'd kind of discuss how the things that we'd done worked for him, and things that were successful we'd develop further. Other ideas that maybe weren't so appropriate or he didn't feel were quite right for film, we'd kind of drop those. So really a huge amount of the work was that process of arriving at what it was we were going to film, rather than knowing exactly that we had to reproduce this or that or whatever. So that's kind of one section of the film. The other fairly major one was that this is a film about a nuclear bomb. So clearly that's a challenge in itself. But Scott Fisher and I have worked together on 3 movies now for Chris, and we both knew that whatever we did, it was going to have to be as practical as possible. And I think we were both fairly confident that if we made a big enough explosion, we would be able to manipulate that in a way to make it feel much bigger. And we basically did pretty straightforward things of slowing it down, shooting at high speed. Well, first of all, we made the biggest explosion we could, and being in New Mexico in the desert, there's nothing around. I mean, we could really let that be a fairly significant component, and shooting at high frame rates, and then further retiming and layering and adding extra elements of retimed sections to add detail when we were close up. And we also shot a whole lot of like shockwave elements and cloud tank columns, and we were compositing those. So some of the more complex explosion, like the Trinity test shots, ended up being a whole lot of layers of elements that were all filmed. We had the advantage of the original Trinity test being shot at night, so all of the archival footage that we were using as reference it's essentially self-illuminating, so it's really quite constrained to that quite a small kind of area that's only the bomb and the cloud column itself that's lit, and then it quite quickly sort of dissipates and turns back to night. And we did a lot of comparing to the archival footage, although we weren't ever trying to exactly reproduce it. It was kind of in a more, I suppose, slightly in the same vein as the other work that was relating to his thoughts and ideas. It was a sort of artistic, slightly more artistic interpretation of the actual footage.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that, because I was like, I think probably everyone knows, or at least has an image of what a nuclear explosion looks like, right? Like, you've seen it so many times in media. And this, I'm like you said, like, it is like more of like it's obviously like, you know what I mean? It's like obvious that you're watching like this Trinity test and like this is like a nuclear explosion, at least as a viewer, you're like, yes, but it doesn't look like, it looks like totally original. I just found that like fascinating, the way it looks, the way you guys were able to do that, and while still affecting the same feeling that you would get seeing a like the mushroom cloud and the whole like typical thing that we've seen in like countless media since it happened, basically. So I was like, really, I just thought that was like an incredible, like, I don't even like sleight of hand, or I don't even know what I would call it. I just thought that was like so good.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously talked a lot about this whole issue of the idea that he wanted to be photographic or based on photographic elements. And I think probably one of the issues that we were dealing with, or what people have been dealing with, is that we're all, as you say, familiar with seeing footage of nuclear tests, but most of what comes to people's minds is much later tests that were like way, way bigger and in daytime, and they go on forever, and you see the whole thing like climbing into the stratosphere. Well, the Trinity test, as I said, was at night, so really it's kind of constrained by that. How much of it you can see is really self-illumination, and you know, we, as I said, we did sort of side-by-side comparisons with the original Trinity tests, and I think with all of the retiming and layering, we got really very close to that. But you know, the idea that of using photographic elements, I mean, everything we do is you know, textured with photographs. So really, a huge amount of the work that we all do is based on photography at some point somewhere. And I always think that, you know, if your ultimate test of good CG is that it looks photographic, well, you know, starting with photographs or photographic material, you're already halfway there. So it's and it's, you know, to be fair, I guess it's Chris Nolan's the artist, and film is the medium that he's chosen to work in, and that's the way he wants his work to be done. And so it's not for us to kind of question that. It's just to, you know, to execute his artistic vision. And actually, I would also say that, you know, a lot of the work that that we do for him, even without that directive from him, I would do it the same way. I mean, I've always started any sort of effectsy work that you know, you're looking for inspiration, you're looking for ways of making things interesting and exciting and novel. I'll always start by shooting something. You know, I suppose, I guess partly because I come from that sort of practical background, I'm very comfortable in that space. So I'll put little tests together that are specific for the particular show that I'm working on, and film a whole lot of stuff. And it's super quick. I hate spending too much time getting kind of bogged down in tests, but, you know, like put really fast little tests together, film them. And, you know, even on a show where, you know, ultimately that's going to end up being a CG effect, you're starting with some practical real world reference, or even more than reference. It's kind of like a design process, I guess, in a way, like rather than trying to specifically design exactly how things work. If you can film something real that relates to the subject matter that you're trying to do, then it'll give you all that for free, and you can shoot a whole lot of different ones very quickly. And so that's very much the process on Chris's films, especially.
Yeah. It's incredible work. Andrew Jackson, we have to wrap up here, but the film is Oppenheimer, Christopher Nolan's blockbuster film. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. Laura,
Pedro's career has included A Monster Calls, Valley of the Dead, The Vault, and The Neighbor. And the new project is Society of the Snow. It's an incredible film. It's a harrowing film. Just to start, I guess, like, obviously about the crash of Flight 571. I've truly never seen anything like the way you kind of depict the plane crash here. I guess, like, where did you start, and like, yeah, like, what were those first conversations with JA about, like, how to approach this moment, I guess?
Well, thank you. The first time that I talked with Jota and Belen and Sandra, the producers, about the movie, I think it was in 2018. And that's when we realized that we need to talk this movie in the most realistic way. So we decided at that moment that, for example, we need to go to the real valley, to travel there, and to have all of the backgrounds realistic, and photograph everything, and don't use made paintings or recreate the ballet with CGI. So starting from this point, we knew that the accident must be the most realistic as we can. So we start doing a pre-visualization with JA, with the team of El Ranchito, working on what he's going to need to tell this whole scene. And when we know what he's going to need, we start working with the team of special effects and also with Alain Bainet, the production designer, to trying to know which construction we are going to need to feel that realism, that to be inside of an airplane during the crash. So once we realized that we need to build two different fuselages. One is the whole airplane in a platform that we can have turbulence,
mm-hmm.
but not a heavy ones. So we can have the whole actors inside for the beginning of the scene. So we can have the real movements of a turbulence there. And for the more extreme moments when the airplane crash, we have another airplane. It's a third part of the plane built on the top of a gimbal that Pau Costa, the special effects supervisor, built, that provide us the heavy movements, the air holes where the airplane like down a lot of meters and the actors goes ups and down. So all of the actions that appears in this crash scene were real. So wow. That's our main focus and most difficult sequence, I think, for all of us, because everything must be planned. It's each shot we need to know, all of the crew, what are we going to need, because we need to remove some walls or do some specific tricks for the camera, the movements of the machines. So everything must be planned because we only have like 2 weeks to shoot the whole accident. So everyone needs to be super focused and know everything.
Dude, one of the things I found so fascinating about watching it is like the way the crash is depicted. It was like, it really conveys, like, obviously, I mean, knock on wood, I've never been in a plane crash, thank God. And I was just like, but I was like, it really conveys the horror of that without like, I don't even know, like without perverse curiosity, maybe, or you know what I mean? It just is like, it feels like very respectful, but very horrific. And I guess, like, how much did you guys talk about that? Maybe not like trying to make sure it wasn't exploitative of what happened versus like just like recreation, you know, that kind of thing. And like, how much balance did you have to strike there?
Yeah, during the whole film, we talk a lot with the survivors. So we knew why they live there. So it's easy for us to make these little pieces about when we broke the leg or the neck of the lady, or all the crash at the end when everything collapsed. Those are things that those people told us. So it's easiest for us to not reimagine an accident or not being realistic, because we always want to know with this movie to be the most realistic as we can at what they lived there 51 years ago, I think.
Yeah.
And well, that's the most important thing for us.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible, like, I swear to God, it's like an amazing sequence. And then that's like only the first maybe 20 minutes of the movie. You have 2 hours to go, where there obviously then you have all this other work to do. So it really,
what's next?
all the elements. I was like, I couldn't believe like how much like the story, everything. I mean, I would like, I sort of like the avalanche obviously is another amazing sequence and like completely incredibly well rendered. I feel like, I don't know, like what would like, so once the crash happens, then I guess like, yeah, like how, like you said, yeah, maybe 2 weeks for that. And then how about the rest of the time? And like, how do you kind of like accomplish that and making sure like those elements are as severe as obviously they probably were.
Yeah, for example, one of the things that in the accident that is also really important for us is to don't simulate things. So, for example, the avalanche is 100% real. It's a real explosion that with real snow that comes inside to the Fairchild, and of course we add some snow later with plates to have more like this heavy, but it's 100% real from snow.
Wow, it's amazing. How much, like, I guess for you then, what was like, I mean, probably this or just in general, but what was like the biggest challenge for you in terms of like this whole project? I guess like, I just like, was there a specific, was it the whole thing, or was there like specific things that you were like, oh, we really have to make sure that we're buttoned up on this part because it's maybe more tricky than we thought or something?
Yeah, I think that the most like, it's not like difficult, but we need to prepare like a year before we start, is to figure it out how we're going to travel to the Valley of Tears and to do all those pictures and what light do we need. So for knowing that, we need to build an application with the Unreal Engine that give us and JA the opportunity to prepare the whole movie before travel to the valley. So when we travel to the valley, we know exactly what we need to be photographed, to be filmed, to be shot with drone, with helicopter, with everything before we start the shooting in Sierra Nevada in Spain. So I think this is the most difficult part for us, and also for the production or for the design of the whole movie.
Yeah. And then I guess like for you, like you obviously worked with Jay before. I mean, like how, like, you know, like how has that relationship evolved, and like how do you guys, like how is he to work with as, you know, a filmmaker, and especially with the visual effects?
Well, for me, and I think also for Felix, it was really amazing to work with him as we work in a monster cause, because he always is searching for this realism, these huge stories with a lot of intensity, and he's very he has a very high standard. So it's really easy for us because he always know what he want. So in this case, with the society of the snow, that we need to be the more realistic as we can, we're always like searching for references and looking at the mountain, at the clouds, and every time we travel by plane, we're sending to each other, no, look at this cloud, no, the light must be like this, no, we're always like sending messages to each other to find the perfect way to tell this story and to be the most realistic that we can.
You mentioned before too how you had like obviously like the survivors, like there are survivors from this that like were able to, you know, like are like, I guess, did you know like what the response, have they, I guess, do you know like have they seen the film, and like certainly like what kind of feedback have you gotten from them in the way you were able to recreate like this,
yes,
you know, obviously tragedy?
Yeah, they saw the movie in Montevideo, I think a month ago or I don't know. No, they get like shocked because the movie gets the audience to the mountain when what they were, when they lived this incredible tragedy, and for them it was unique and amazing the way JA tell this story, and to put the audience there to feel the mountain, to be in the same prison that they were for 72 days.
Yeah, it's an amazing story, and it's an amazing film. Laura, Pedro, Society of the Snow, thank you so much for doing
Thank
this.
you.
Thank you. Mike Lasker's career has included Watchmen, Edge of Tomorrow, the Angry Birds movie, and the Mitchells versus the Machines. And he's here to talk about Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Just an amazing, amazing film. You've worked with, similar to some of our other panels, you've worked with Phil Lord and Chris Miller a lot. And obviously their projects have such a specific tone. And I was wondering, how does that affect you from a visual effects standpoint?
Yeah, so like you said, I've worked with Chris and Phil, back with Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, and then the sequel, and then Into the Spider-Verse, and then Mitchell's. And one thing that they're really good at is pushing boundaries. With the first Into the Spider-Verse, we kind of had to reinvent how we made animated films. And up to that point, you'd sort of rely on the same principles, how you render hair and skin and eyes and the environment. And when we did that, we really kind of broke out of all of our techniques, and we had to invent every aspect of filmmaking, which, you kind of come to rely on it. And then when you can't, you're kind of like, oh God, what am I going to do? And then you sort of reinvent it and get used to those challenges. So working with them, they're always like, why are we going to do it if we're not going to go all the way? And if you kind of inch your way forward, it takes a while to get there. And they're good at sort of having you push beyond what you thought you could do. They're very creative. And that's one thing I've learned with these movies with these really interesting looks, is it's better to kind of overshoot and then pull back. And that's really what we did with the first one. And then with Mitchell's versus the Machines, we kind of took a different route of coming up with a look that was different. And then with Across the Spider-Verse, it was like that times 10, all these different worlds, all these different looks. And what's really great is a lot of our artists in our studio are used to doing this now. So we like the challenge, we like the hurdles. And that was what was so much fun about doing these 3 movies in a row. It's created this culture of just tearing down walls, figuring out how to fix, or come up with solutions to things that seem impossible. So if anything, working with them has sort of gotten us into this mode of creating images that no one's ever seen before and creating tools that no one's ever used before.
It's incredible. Like you said, this movie is so it's so massive. I was rewatching it again over the weekend, and it's just like, I cannot believe how much is going. Like everywhere you look in every frame, it feels like there's 1,000 different things to notice. And how do you, you were just saying, where do you start? I mean, how do you even where do you even wrap your head around some of the stuff you have to do? Yeah.
There is a lot going on in this movie. It's 3,000 shots in every shot, every frame, we really wanted to be treated as a painting. So when we started development, we knew about half the movie was going to be in Miles's world, Earth 1610, which we had done in the first movie. And when we started it up, I wanted to sort of take the best of what we did on the first one and make that the baseline. So I wanted us to evolve the look, make it better. So Miles's world, he was older, about 18 months have passed. So it was sort of like we getting back to that. And then we've got 5 other universes to figure out. And the directorial team and Chris and Phil were so great at giving us references. So in order to sort of even start, we'd start with artist references for the type of medium they wanted to use. Because all of the looks, we sort of collaborated and figured out together. It's not like you start and this is the look for Gwen's world. This is the look for 2099. We know kind of what the aspirations are. And then we take the reference and we just start developing, start working with them, and just try to push it into a realm that no one's thought of. And that's what's so much fun, is you start with kind of what the aspirations are, what the reference is. And then we started with our team and our development and innovation, and you create this look that's sort of there's what you want it to look like. And then there's sort of what's beyond that and what everyone working together creates. So there was a lot of just trying things out, experimenting, coming up with new tools to paint. We're always trying to make things not look rendered. We're always trying to make it look like it's not made by the computer, which is tough. We're flying through India, and it's which is a dense city. And as soon as you see the parallax of buildings in 3D, you're like, no, we don't want that. So we have to constantly police that thing. But honestly, it was so much fun. And if you're an artist, and we get more and more artists joining these productions that have fine art backgrounds and love painting. They love line work. They love comic art. So you kind of feed off that. And to circle back to your question, you know, in order for every frame, for every shot to have so much artistry in that, you have to leverage off of the artistic talents of the 1,000 artists that are on the show. And I always say, if you have a great idea, it's going to get in there because everyone brings their knowledge and experience to it. And it was like that for the first movie. You really just have to kind of channel everyone's artistry. And that's really the secret to it.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's so great. You mentioned like all the different worlds. Obviously, the movie starts with like the Spider-Gwen, like basically like a prologue, maybe like 20 minutes or so of that. I love that sequence so much. I think it's like I rewatched it just independently of the movie. I think it's like so well thought out. Everything about it is great. I guess like knowing that was going to be the opening of the film, and that's a new world that we haven't really seen. Like you were saying, like kind of like, I guess, how did you guys, or what was like the biggest challenge in that, or how did you kind of like approach that opening like sequence?
Well, Gwen's world was the biggest challenge, and it was the first new world we had to develop, and we only caught a quick glimpse of it Into the Spider-Verse. And we had these brand new tools, and it was like maybe 10 shots, 12 shots at most in the first film. So we knew going into this one, it was the first 25 minutes of the movie, plus you go back to it later. So we had to create tools and techniques that you could live in this world for that long. And what really made it tough was it had to look like a painting. It had to be brushed. You had to have paintbrushes coming off of edges. We had to have line work. We built a new line tool. We built tools where we could fill up scenes with millions of brushstrokes, tools where we could paint along edges. So you're in that Guggenheim. And all those circular floors, you had to paint brushstrokes along the form. And on top of that, since it was watercolor, and that was really the look of the world was wet on wet medium, overall watercolor, but depending on the sequence, there were more graphic elements. Gwen swinging out of her apartment, you get looks where you use friscuits, where it just goes to white and there are hard edges, because her world is like a mood ring. It's whatever her emotion is. Sometimes it's very abstract, sometimes it's very pointed. So you've got the watery brushstrokes, you've got dripping paint in every single shot of her world, whether it's played up for emotion purposes or subtle. So brushstrokes, dripping paint, line work, and then to top it all off, every shot in her world looks completely different than the one before and the one after. And typically when you light a CG animated movie, you know, you can create a light rig, you know, you can run out your shots, you can optimize, but every shot had a lighting key. Every shot had an emotion. Shadows are going different ways. Colors are changing. So it was like, that was honestly probably the biggest challenge. And then they all have to play together. So the very first sequence we did in Gwen's world was the Guggenheim. And the end of the Guggenheim sequence is that very emotional interchange between Gwen and her dad. And as things get heated, paint starts to drip, the background starts to dissolve, you get into really abstract backgrounds. And we had to do that whole sequence twice because we kind of did it and we watched it and we're like, okay, that doesn't quite work. That doesn't quite work. So we went back and we sort of honed it because you know, for this type of thing, you have to watch it play. So, but I'm really thrilled you asked about Gwen's world because everything we learned and everything we built for that, we used for the rest of the production, all of that innovation.
Yeah, that's amazing. We have to wrap up, but I just quickly, I guess, if you could do it, in 2099, we get to see all the different Spider-Man. Obviously, there's so many. And I guess, did you have a favorite or one that you were like, like that was like, what was your favorite one? I guess that's in there.
You know, it's funny. You got to love the T-Rex. You've got to love Spider-Cat. Anya is a great character. She's in one shot. And she has all this armor come on when they see Miles. We built an entirely new crowd system just for spider characters where they can have different proportions and different logos and different colors. But there's so many to choose from. But Spider-Cat's pretty great. Crowd favorite.
Yeah, that was honestly, I think my daughter's favorite too, and she also loved the T-Rex. Mike Lasker, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Again, feel like we talk about this forever, but it was amazing VFX work. Thank you so much. Robin Hollander for Cocaine Bear, Pablo Helman for Killers of the Flower Moon, Andrew Jackson for Oppenheimer, Laura Pedro for Society of the Snow, and Mike Lasker for Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, all incredible VFX artists. And I guess, we just wanted to start. We've talked a lot in all our separate interviews about kind of this doing invisible work and kind of making it feel as real as possible. And I guess for you, what is, so in general as VFX people, what is the biggest excitement about doing that kind of thing, where you want to make it feel as real as possible, and how much of that is an enthusiastic challenge for you, I guess, at this point of your incredible careers. Robin, we can start with you and then we'll go around.
Well, I think for me, I think I might speak for a lot of people in the industry. I think there's a background in photography and a love for the media. And I think what I love about that is it's a tangible art form, right? You can pick up a camera, you can pick up your iPhone, you can take a photo, you can sort of geek out over it. And I think as a visual effects artist, you suddenly start breaking it down, and shadows and clouds that look real or don't look real, and aberrations and all that kind of stuff. So that's always excited me. And I'm just really happy at the state of the industry right now, that it feels like there's more of a shift again to realism, maybe is the wrong word, but more photography. So less people on a green screen, more stuff that is shot and be adding to it rather than creating the entire thing. And that excites me because, again, it has that tangible feeling of something that I can relate to, something I can pick up and sort of feel a little bit more. That's the thing that I really enjoy about it, and the sort of the nuances that you can find in all of that as well. Yeah.
Pablo, how about you?
Well, for me, it's about storytelling. It's about, being a filmmaker and realizing that you are part of a team of people that, filmmaking is one of the most collaborative disciplines in art that you could have. And if you have the chance to work with no compromises and no budget constraints or anything like that, and you can free your mind to take a look at the content and what it is that you're reading the script and the director wants to bring in, and you're contributing to that. Thinking that if we didn't have visual effects, we didn't have the storytelling, because we can shoot a play that, of course. For me, it's the best way to do it is to do as a combination of things. And for me, visual effects is about putting something together with something that we shot that is completely invisible. If we do that, then we're telling a completely different story than what we shot, and it's part of that storytelling.
Yeah, Andrew, how about you?
Look, I love working on shows that are grounded in the real world, and I know that's only really one part of the whole visual effects world, because there's a lot of things, with monsters and creatures that we all know are not, real things. But for me, my particular kind of love, really, I suppose, is exactly that, as Robin was saying, of kind of referencing the real world and finding what it is about that scene or the particular thing that you're trying to achieve that makes it look as real as possible, and using photography or at least referencing real photography and using real light, and I've certainly found myself going away from the idea of using green screens and blue screens these days. And as roto gets better and easier, it allows the DP to light the scene and make it look more real from the start. And we know it's going to be a little bit harder later, but we can reference that real photography much more and bring the visual effects into that world. So that's kind of the way that I love to work.
Yeah, definitely. Laura, how about you?
Well, for me, it's like a mix between them. For me, and most of the projects that I work, we have a large of conversation with the directors, thinking about how we can help the story with our artists, with the VFX. So for me, this part is really interesting, to help the project to help the director to tell the story, and also to work with the DP, with all of the crew to can have what the story needs. So also with the reference, with everything, but I like a mix between both of them. It's like all of the projects I've been working is like is this mix for me.
Yeah. And Mike, how about you? Like you're saying, like in Spider-Verse, like even like making it feel like it's hand painted, you know, like all these different things. It's like so you know, like tactile, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like it feels so real, even if it's like it feels like a comic book you can hold, basically.
Well, it's interesting because we're trying to make paintings that look like real paintings, but at the same time, we're shooting handheld, where we have sort of optical effects and depth of field. There's no motion blur, but you've got glows, you've got lens flares, and how do those more photography-based effects mix with this stylized world? So we need to have like a stylized version for all of those. So like a lens flare, we've got like 6 versions of that. Depth of field, we've got 6 different types, and we have to make it so you don't look at things that are out of focus. So we have to come up with a stylized way that it looks brushed, but it's not distracting, right? So and a lot of my background, a lot of our artists, we came up through live action, more realistically rendered techniques, and where we are using a realistic render. So we're constantly sort of taking what we like from it, subtracting other things, because you want a little bit of global illumination, a little bit of realistic lighting, but just enough that it looks really sophisticated, and then you can strip it all away and get more stylized. It's a real fine line with a lot of this stuff.
Yeah. Robin, you mentioned like before there about like getting away from green screens. I think Andrew did too, and like, or you know, like kind of that. Do you think that's also because of the improvement in home, like, you know what I mean, like people now, not just in theaters, but like obviously like we have 4K TVs and 4K. Do you guys feel like that is partially because the delivery systems are better for people at home? Like, I don't know, like how do you guys think about that in terms of like creating this stuff where it's like, oh, now like people are really able to see what we're doing, and like you don't want to, you know what I mean, like it's going to be, if there is something that's not perfect or great, they're going to really be able to notice. I guess, do you guys think about that at all? And Robin, we could start with you and then go back around. I don't know. What do you think?
Not necessarily, because I think the standard that we set ourselves in this virtual room are probably higher than the end viewer ever will have. Okay. And that's, you know, it's to our detriment quite often, because we will nut out over details that no one else cares about. I think with the green screens, it's I don't know, it's potentially just, I think the human eye and the human mind is so tuned to what is real and what isn't. And it doesn't take much for that to just sort of break. And you look at it and go, that doesn't look real. The relationship between this and that does not look real, but I don't know why, potentially as an end user. And I think as soon as you shoot something in the real world, like Andrew said, if you take the green screen away and just spend a little bit more time actually extracting that person or that object properly, maybe adding on top of that, I think that blend between what is real and what isn't just kind of goes away a little bit more. And, you know, I'm a big fan of that. My background is a compositor, so I want my effects to be invisible. I want it to be the kind of thing that my grandmother does not really understand what it is I'm doing, because I'm pointing at a picture saying I did half of that, and she goes, what do you mean? They were all there. And that's the thing. It's that subtlety of the human brain and the human eye that I think you almost can't control at that level. You just know whether it's real or not. And the more real you shoot, the better that result, I think, will be.
Right. Yeah, it's true. Pablo, you were saying when we were talking before about the final shot of Kills the Flower Moon, I didn't, again, another one where I was like, how is that? That's not, those aren't real people. I don't know. I just sound like, so I guess like you probably, would you agree with like what Robin was saying there a little about? Like,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think it is about technology, and it's about you know, your younger people are getting more sophisticated too. But it's also, for me, it's about performance. Because when you are in a set that has blue screen, the actors don't perform the same way. And if you don't have that, and you allow also the lighting to do what it needs to do, for me, it's 95% of the shot is the lighting. And I have found that you can never escape what you shoot. You can change it a little bit, but you know what? It's just the spirit of what you're shooting is going to be there. So for me, yes, I mean, there's no blue screen or green screen. I mean, if you really think about where it comes from control. I mean, in visual effects, we want to have all the control because we want to separate all the pieces and we want to change all the stuff. Well, the director wants to have all the control. The actors want to have all the control. So there's always the DP wants to have a control. So the production designer the same. So it's kind of a dance right there. But I'd rather not have green screen and blue screen. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Andrew, I'm sure you
Yeah,
probably
no,
agree with
I
this.
agree. I like to give the control of the lighting to the DP on set and not try and kind of, because you're absolutely right, not just the actors, but everybody is like, oh, well, it's a green screen shoot, it's like we can't control that, so it's over to you. But then we, like you said, we're trapped in that world of whatever was shot, and it's not necessarily the best thing. And just to your point of the resolution of modern technology, I don't think it helps us, but I think the public now will start seeing bad edges. So the whole not using green screens and blue screens is probably harder now because of the technology, but it's also more important, I think, because like you said, you just feel that when it's I always say that we basically use greens. I mean, obviously there are situations where you have to, when you've got a particular foreground element and that it's going to be impossible to rotate, but there's so many situations where you just know that it's way harder to make a badly shot look good than it is to do more roto. Like if it already looks good and the DP was able to light it, and let's face it, everyone wants backlighting, and if you put a big green screen there, you can't do that. So you're already struggling. So yeah, that's definitely my preferred approach.
I always also think, there's a lot of extension work that gets done. I mean, I don't care about blue screen or green screen that gets done outside the actors, especially if somebody has the hair that I have. So it's a real problem. So I'd rather just have everything around the actors, even if it's like 20 by 20 or 40 by 40, and they may have blue screen or whatever, there, but I'm always protecting the performances because I know that that's where the people are looking at.
Yeah.
Interesting what Pablo was saying about the control that all the stakeholders have. You can have the best intentions shooting something on a green screen and knowing what the scene looks like, but the reality is if you shoot in a moonlit forest, that's likely what the shot's going to look like. But if you light for a moonlit forest on a green screen, someone might suddenly turn it into daytime at the beach. We've all seen that happen as well. And then suddenly you have that sort of battle of control of what was set and what we're going to take away from it. And I think that sort of opened up a can of worms sometimes as well.
We obviously don't need green screens on a fully animated film, but we typically light all of our characters together the same way. And then in the comp, we sort of get them to look like their eventual looks. But once we have them casting shadows in each other within light directions, they all need to look like they're there, but you are sort of tied into that, like it's a live action shoot to some degree. But what's interesting about the 4K, I mean, with Into the Spider-Verse and Across the Spider-Verse, audiences like to pause on frames and look for Easter eggs and things like that, especially in the first one. So we were kind of conscious of that going into Across the Spider-Verse. So I mean, it definitely makes it more challenging, but every single frame we had to make sure was kind of like, perfect and had little things and everything. There were no big mistakes and things like that. Just being conscious of that made things a little bit more tricky.
Yeah. Laura, what do you think about this?
No, for example, for us in Society of the Snow, I think maybe we have only one shot or two filmed with green screen. And it's because we lost completely the snow and we are in the mountain. So we have the background brown and the characters with everything was brown. So it was impossible. And we don't want to use roto there. So I think we only use, for example, in this movie, green screen for 2 shots. The whole movie is filmed in real snow. So, or we replace with the luma key and we put the original mountain with the light that we have in the Andes, which is the same the light that we have in Sierra Nevada, because we put everything in the same direction, so it matches perfect those lights. So it's in that case, in our case, we don't use green screens at all.
Yeah. Robin, you mentioned there before about how you want to a goal is so your grandmother doesn't know kind of what you're doing, but I guess for all of you, it's a silly question, I guess, but I was did you have or like, do you have a formative memory of like a visual effect or something that you were like, oh wow, that was like really cool, or like how did they do that? I guess even like in an like from like when you were younger or something, I guess like how, like do you have something like that you were like, oh, that's really cool and I want to know how they did that kind of thing? What do you think, Robin? Did you have one of those?
Oh, I mean, for me, formative movie was Star Wars. You know, oddly enough, I didn't grow up to be a Star Wars fanboy, but I saw that movie and I was like, I want to blow up spaceships, because I didn't really know that that wasn't real. I thought there was a career choice that one could apply for, much to my parents' dismay, because I did try those techniques in the local schoolyard and no one was too impressed with that. Yeah, I think for me, it has this sort of, it's rooted in that history for me, and seeing something I couldn't quite understand, wasn't real, but actually, sorry, it looked real, but totally wasn't real. So I'm not sure if there was a particular shot from that I could take away, but I think just that as an experience, you know, that sort of set my eyes onto the path a little
For sure. They used to have when I was a kid, I remember there was a like a making of the Star Wars where they had like a lot of like the miniatures and the models that they all like kind of blew out. And I remember watching that so much, and it was just really cool to watch how they did it. But
Yeah.
Pablo, how about you?
And
Do you
actually,
have like any kind of
sorry, just to add to
formative-
that, like when I saw Heat, you remember that with Keanu Reeves, I remember they shot tons of stuff there with miniatures, which at the time when you see the movie, it still blows my mind now, or even Con Air movies like that, they had these elaborate motion control rigs and shot explosions of the plane landing on the strip and all of that cool stuff. It still holds up and it still looks so cool. So sorry, it just popped into my mind.
Yeah,
so
no,
just
that's great.
No, that's fine. I think there's a lot of stuff that happens there. I mean, one of the things, you know, having worked with the modelers, you know, from those movies, they have a specific eye that is very difficult to come by these days, because everybody works in front of a monitor as opposed to, you know, just manipulating the models, and so there is a specific aesthetic to shooting it that way. Number one. Number two, the lighting was a lot more difficult to control in post. So we used to light those things really well, and so the edges were a lot better, because then you have, you know, your blue screen is lit the right way. And then on the other side, you know, I was just in a demo of a technology that basically gives you auto matting, you know, auto mats based on depth on the camera. And so all that stuff is coming. I mean, it's not quite there yet, but it will come in the next 4 or 5 years. And so we'll be able to light and shoot on a background that is not going to be the one that is going to be in the movie, but the lighting is pretty much the same. And we're going to be able to change those backgrounds based on the matting that we, you know, infer from, you know, depth. And I mean, we used to, you know, play a little bit with infrared photography and see if maybe we can just bathe the, you know, the whole scene in infrared and then just get an automatic that way. But it's not going that way. It's going the depth way, which is great.
Yeah, because depth in itself is another very valuable bit of information.
Yeah, you can get all my hair and properly.
Yeah, that is true. And I think stereo or native stereo movies, you know, obviously there's a few big tentpoles that still use that technology, but for us on the post side, that was really valuable information, because quite quickly before we get any roto paint done, you could block out animation. You could do some really fun things with it, because you have the disparity between the two eyes, which creates a depth mat, so you can start fleshing it out. And I think to Pablo's point, it's really exciting when we start seeing that a little bit more real time on set, because it means the director might have that vision of what is that dinosaur going to look like running back there through that scene, you know. And I think it helps deliver a better product to us, which then helps make it a better end product back for the viewers as well. So it's super exciting that is coming.
Yeah.
I think my the film that I loved early on was Blade Runner. I just loved that. The way that made a like immersive world that you completely believed, and I know that was like quite early on, and not really any CG effects in there, and that was kind of possible to do that in that time, and to build such an immersive world.
Yeah, pretty awesome. Laura, how about you? Any movies coming to mind or moments?
For me, my favorite one that comes to my mind is Death Becomes Her.
It's a great one.
Yeah, it's a movie that normally I rewatch it, and thinking about how they do this. It's like I don't know, and it's amazing. It's an amazing movie, and the special effects and the visual effects, I think, that are still working. So no, it's a really special movie for me.
That's great. Yeah, that's a good one. And Mike, how about you?
You know, I was a huge Star Wars fan when I was a kid. You couldn't get, I could recite them by heart. And, you know, movies like Toy Story got me really interested going into the business. But if there's a shot, it's that shot in Jurassic Park where they look up and they see that Brontosaurus for the first time. And the amount of just awe and just, I couldn't believe I was looking at that, just inspired me to get into this business. I just love that feeling of not being able to believe what I was looking at.
It still holds up.
Like,
Yeah, it still holds up. It's
great.
so great.
Yeah.
We have to wrap up here, but this has been such a great conversation. I've loved hearing about all of your stuff. And like I said, these are 5 amazing films and great work. Robin Hollander for Cocaine Bear, Pablo Helman for Kills the Flower Moon, Andrew Jackson for Oppenheimer, Laura Pedro for Society of the Snow, and Mike Lasker for Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Just wonderful films, and check them out. And thank you all for doing this. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks
Much.
Bye.